You're cruising along at 22,000 feet, maybe taking a little nap, when suddenly an explosion creates a massive hole in the fuselage of your jetliner. All you can do is cling dearly to your seat and pray. For most of the passengers of United Airlines Flight 811, their prayers were answered with a miracle. 1 a.m., February 24th, 1989, 354 passengers and a crew boarded United Airlines Flight 811 from Honolulu to New Zealand. Piloting the flight was 38-year veteran Captain David Cronin, who had only 2 flights left before retirement, and he had nearly missed this one.
I considered calling in sick because I had a lot of sick time left, but there was something inside me that made me put on my uniform and pack my bags and go out that door, because I knew I had to go on that flight that day.
Flying in business class was attorney Bruce Lambert, a specialist in airline crash litigation. In spite of his daily work with crash victims, Bruce had no qualms about flying.
I felt very comfortable. I had an innate trust in the design, the engineering, manufacture of airplanes. I did not ever, prior to this incident, have any concerns about getting on a commercial air flight.
Sherry Peterson, a travel agent from Denver, Colorado, boarded the plane at the last moment. By the time Sherry reached her assigned seat in row 9, someone was already sitting there.
Excuse me.
We were nearing takeoff, so the flight attendant simply said, take a seat anywhere, so I moved back to row 13.
Perhaps not the luckiest number until today. Although the plane took off during a heavy thunderstorm, it soon climbed to 22,000 feet and clear skies. The passengers began to settle in for the all-night 9-hour flight.
I put that Walkman on. I took my shoes off. I remember putting a blanket over my legs and just leaning back and saying, well, at least now I'll get some sleep.
Sherry Peterson was also looking forward to a restful flight, but just as she had fastened her seatbelt, she heard a voice.
A young man whispered in my ear, tighten your seatbelt, you're in for the ride of your life.
Where did this voice come from? What did it mean? Sherry didn't wait long to find out. She tightened her seatbelt and within seconds found herself facing death.
I closed my eyes and boom, it was like a paper bag popping.
The airplane literally flew up and to the left, came right out of my hands.
We had a bomb or something go off in the airplane. We're taking a 180 and trying to get back to the airport.
And next thing I knew, I had been just yanked forward with a force you can't imagine.
Panels are blown down from the overhead. There's a whooshing of air.
Captain, there's a huge hole in the right side of the airplane.
A huge 10 by 40-foot section of the right forward cabin was blown away. In an instant, 9 business class passengers were swept away to their deaths, including the man sitting in the seat that Sherry had been originally assigned to.
Everything that was around me was gone. The debris that was flying forward, people were bloodied, and it was just this utter chaos, and people were, gathering and grabbing things and grabbing each other.
The explosive decompression was absolutely, incredibly, unbelievably terrifying.
There was a flight attendant that had been pulled under the seat, and she was very contorted and bloodied and dazed, obviously, and she couldn't remove herself to even help anyone. I was holding on to her because I'm thinking, at what point do all these people go?
There was no place to go. There was nothing to say, nothing you could do. You were totally at the mercy of the laws of physics and the courage of 3 men who were fighting for their lives in the cockpit.
No jumbo jet had ever sustained this much damage and survived.
There is a lot of pressure just flying normally without any emergencies going on. But when you've lost people out of the airplane, you're concentrating on totally what you're doing. You're not thinking about anything else except to get the airplane back to Honolulu.
Anticipating a crash, passengers gripped their armrests in prayer and fear and waited. Minutes later, another disaster struck. one of the plane's engines, clogged with debris from the explosion, caught on fire.
We've lost engine number 3. We've got engine number 4 shut down because it appeared like we had as if we had a fire out there. We want.
I looked out and I could see flames reflecting in the co-pilot's face. Looked down at number 4 engine gauge and the temperature was going to the peg, so I shut that engine down.
Inside the cabin, passengers clung to each other in terror.
The seats at front, opposite me and behind me, were full of couples, married couples that were traveling together. And in every instance, the husband had reached out and grabbed the wife and pulled her in close and was holding her tight, and I could see the whites of their knuckles as they held their loved ones close to them.
40 minutes after the explosion, as emergency personnel hastily prepared for a crash landing, Captain Cronin spotted land.
All these valves are open, Captain. All right.
Okay, we're doing 220 knots now.
The airport, but we don't have the airport.
Once we saw land, I knew that we had a really good chance of getting it back. Maybe not on the runway, but at least in the vicinity of the runway.
Okay, I see the airport out there, straight ahead.
As the crippled airplane approached the airport, Sherry said a final prayer. She was pleading for a miracle.
You're sitting alone with your thoughts and you start making deals with God. I mean, if we get out of this, things are going to change. I will change. I know what I've done wrong.
Sherry's prayer was answered. The landing was a miracle in itself.
It was the best and smoothest landing I've made probably in my career. We didn't even know we were on the runway. It was that smooth.
Stunned passengers rushed from the plane the moment it came to a stop. Miraculously, only 27 people were treated for injuries, none of which were life-threatening, although most of them had trouble believing they were still alive.
I remember walking around the airplane and standing on the tarmac, looking back up at this airplane 30 feet off the ground, and this gaping, huge, humongous hole looked like the size of a building. You could have driven a bulldozer through the side of that hole.
After extensive investigation, it was determined that faulty electrical wiring had caused the plane's door to open in mid-flight, and the door, caught by the wind and the speed of the aircraft, tore a whole section of the plane away, pulling several rows of passengers to their deaths, and yet somehow the plane continued to fly.
The airplane was very unstable and was difficult to maintain heading. But by the grace of God, we were spared and brought back that night by a miracle.
The miracle of Flight 811 is it gave me my life back. It made me realize who and what is really important to me. It introduced me to a realm of angels. By that young voice telling me to tighten my seatbelt, I was in for the ride of my life. I knew at that moment I was never alone again. People talk about intuitive thoughts or a voice in their head. This was an actual voice with a body to it, only when I turned there was no body. It convinced me that if you're willing to listen, they're there to help.